right after that, I went to bed and there was a flash of light. And the next thing you know, I am standing next to the bed. Now, I didn't know I had just had an out of body experience. And I could see myself laying in the bed. And so immediately I panicked because I didn't understand that at all. I'd never heard of it. So I will say that that whole experience lasted over a month of every time I closed my eyes, every time I went to bed, I would come out of my body. And then Spirit took me on all these nightly journeys. And
Wow.
I can remember all of them. And I knew that I was traveling. I knew that my body was in bed at home, but I was now at the end of the month, I'm beginning to feel the consequences of lack of sleep. And I knew I needed to get some sleep.
Welcome in. I'm Kimberly. I'm so glad you're here today. This discussion is going to be fascinating. I can't wait to dive in. However, before we get started, if you're enjoying this content, make sure you hit that subscribe button and click the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And if you'd rather listen than watch, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, and all podcast platforms. In addition, if you'd like to keep abreast of what's happening around the planet, but it seems a little overwhelming, and I don't blame you, you might want to sign up for our Friday morning email newsletter. The link is in the description box down below. Every Friday morning, we send out a very short, very sweet, but very informative free email newsletter highlighting what we think are important developments around the planet. It's very short, very sweet, very free, easy to sign up with a link in the description box down below. I think you're going to love it. And with that, I'd like to welcome in psychic Nancy Rebecca. Nancy, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
I'm so anxious for this conversation because it's going to be right in the topic that I think is so important for people right now, and that is managing on the planet as we go through these incredible changes. However, before we dive into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you came to do the work you're doing?
Yeah, so I definitely will try to put this in a nutshell. But it was a time that I refer to as my down on my knees moment. I was I am a registered nurse. I had worked in intensive care and open heart recovery for about 16 years. I had been asked to go over to hospice temporarily just to teach them more about heart and lung disease in stage for hospice care. I ended up loving it and I ended up staying there for about 8 years. But during that very first year as a hospice nurse, I had three family members kind of given 6 months notice of that they would be going through the dying process. So, as many can imagine, that kind of burning the candle at both ends, not only I had my husband and I had my two pre-teenagers, which we all know what that's like. I'm working by day as a full-time care hospice case manager, and then I'd come home and change, and then I would care for my family. So there was this point where, it was this breaking point. So I went into my bedroom and I locked the door and I got down on my knees and I just said, God, why do people have to die? Because I felt like I was just breaking open inside. I didn't know that I'd be able to handle all of this loss and this grief. And so afterwards, there wasn't really anything that happened. However, I was kind of guided. So I believe, sometimes we get those signs. We think it's our mind, but it's actually spirit that's kind of nudging us in a certain direction. And so I went to the bookstore and purchased a book on how to meditate because I had heard of meditation. And when you meditate, you're supposed to be calm inside. I purchased the book. I brought it home. I immediately took my little brown paper bag with the book inside. I hid it behind all the other books on the bookshelf because I didn't want anybody to know. Now this was 30 years ago. Didn't want anybody to know, didn't want my husband to know that I was meditating because there was just a lot of opinions about meditation and it wasn't very positive at the time. And then after my husband and kids went to bed, I did pull that book out from behind the other books and I slipped it quietly out of the brown paper bag and I opened it up and right away it says calm the light. So I had dimmer lights, light a candle. So I lit the candle. So I'm a nurse. I'm an intensive care nurse. I really love physiology. I definitely like following the rules. And so I lit that candle. They suggested putting on soft music. I sat down with my feet on the floor on the couch, and then they guide you to breathe. Okay, just breathe. So I took 3 deep breaths. And at that point, and I imagine many of your listeners can imagine, it's like you can't get your mind to calm down. It's just like, all right, that 5 minutes is enough. Well, it was right after that, I went to bed and there was a flash of light. And the next thing you know, I am standing next to the bed. Now, I didn't know I had just had an out of body experience. And I could see myself laying in the bed. And so immediately I panicked because I didn't understand that at all. I'd never heard of it. So I will say that that whole experience lasted over a month of every time I closed my eyes, every time I went to bed, I would come out of my body. And then spirit took me on all these nightly journeys. And
Wow.
I can remember all of them. And I knew that I was traveling. I knew that my body was in bed at home, but I was now at the end of the month, I'm beginning to feel the consequences of lack of sleep. And I knew I needed to get some sleep. Both my parents are doctors. My mother's a psychologist, a doctor of psychology. My father's a medical doctor. So I even went to stay with them for a week to see if they could kind of help me get this all settled. So I ended up looking through the yellow pages, and a lot of people, I know they're listening in, they don't know what the yellow pages
I know,
are.
I was just going to laugh. Remember the yellow pages? Oh my goodness. I used to put a book on your front porch that
Yes.
had the phone numbers of everybody in your neighborhood.
Somebody was saying to me the other day, like that would go against so many rules right now. If somebody had that phone book and can call you, just go through and randomly call numbers. So I went to the phone book because someone had told me once, have you ever gone to see a psychic? And I was like, oh no, I would never do anything like that. That terrifies me. But remember, I said sometimes you have those thoughts. You think it's your mind, but it's spirit driven. And so at the time, I didn't realize all that. But I went to the Yellow Pages to see if there was listings for psychics, and there were only 3 listings. Now, if you go on Dr. Google, there's millions and millions, maybe even billions of listings now. So if that doesn't tell you how much we are awakening on the earth, I don't know what is. But I did find a very sweet, sweet woman. She sounded reasonable. Turned out she was a retired kindergarten teacher. So she was really able to help settle my fears. And what she taught me was how to ground my energy, how to kind of come back down into my body. And literally in less than 5 minutes, Kimberly, I felt better than I had felt in my whole life. In my whole life, I did not
Wow.
know that a human being could feel that good. What I realize now, what I was feeling was my own spirit. I
Mm.
was feeling my own soul and feeling how beautiful it was. Now, what I didn't say was after that first night when I came back into my body, I call it suddenly sighted. So, what I mean by that was suddenly, even during the day, I was still working. I was still visiting my hospice patients. And that's a whole story in itself because I could now see into the spirit world at the same time I could see the physical world. I could still drive my car and go get a burger for lunch and talk to people, but I was having to train myself to just look at their eyes because I could see their loved ones and their guides and their angels and all around them. I could hear their thoughts. I could see their auras. I could see their chakras. But it didn't mean that I knew what it was. I didn't know what it was. And from my perspective and my training, I must be mentally ill. And it's my mother that convinced me that I wasn't mentally ill. And she didn't want me to go to the hospital, but I didn't understand what was happening. And then my father took me back to the bookstore. I found the book Barbara Brennan. I don't know if you've ever heard of Barbara Brennan, but she has a book out. She has since passed, but the book is called Light Emerging. And we found it in the medical section of all places. And when my father opened it up, there were all these color pictures of auras. And I said to him, oh, that's what I'm
That's it.
seeing. So that was 30 years ago. And in addition to that, this voice said that the voice that to me now, that and then that I knew as God said, I need you to go out and help people to remember that they are spiritual beings having a human experience. Now, at the time, I'd never heard that term, but we hear everyone now. It's a common statement to hear. You're a soul having a human experience. And so that's what really started my whole kind of shift in career. About 6 years later, I retired and started working with people in the human energy field, studying the human energy field, really trying to understand their illnesses, their anxieties, their depressions, because I could see the energy field. I could see what it looked like in the energy field. And I began to see patterns. So here now, fast forward where we are now, 30 years later, that has expanded to a universal level, a global level, an earthly level, and frequencies. So that's kind of my gig now. It's like we are so impacted by frequencies and much more than we realize. And so, yeah, that's what I'm trying to help people to understand.
What a wonderful story. I wanted to stop here and ask just a couple of questions before we move on to the frequencies on the planet right now. So you developed this almost instant
It was instant. Yeah.
psychic ability, which I think is fabulous. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
It was terrifying, but yes.
Terrifying and exciting all at the same time.
Yeah.
However, this was at a time where we don't have the information about energy fields or auras or symbols that spirit usually will speak to you in symbols. How did you navigate or start figuring out what all this stuff meant and what to do with it?
Well, fortunately, I did find the retired kindergarten teacher. And I did, when I first actually saw her in person, I started crying because I was just so overwhelmed. And she said, two things. I just want to say two things. You're safe here. And what is happening to you is really real. It's
Oh,
not your imagination. You're not crazy. It's really real. And so I started taking meditation classes in person there, and then they had intuitive development classes. And I was scared, but I knew I couldn't go back to those
yeah.
stress levels that I was experiencing. So that helped me. But also, as I was watching the energy field, like I remember one of the hospice nurses I was training, she was a new hospice nurse. She had gone out to take a phone call. She came in, the whole room flooded with red. And I said, oh, what just happened to make you so angry? And she just snapped her head around and she was like, how did you know that? And I said, well, the whole room went red. And as it turned out, her husband was in the military and he signed up for another 3 years without discussing it with her first. So I began to learn like that. just real life experiences. I could hear my spirit, and I lost all my friends. And my husband, we'd been married 18 years, and he could no longer stay married to me if I was going to be meditating.
Oh,
And he took me to court to see if he could get custody of the kids. I mean, I know a lot of your listeners are going to think, did that really happen? But 30 years ago, those things really, really happened. And fortunately, the judge was like, just because she meditates and she's intuitive is not a good enough reason to take her kids away. And I
yeah.
thought, wow, all right, there's reason. It helped show me there were reasonable people in the world.
Mhm. Yeah. Oh, yeah, interesting. I had this one question and it nags me all the time, and we'll touch on it real quickly before we keep, move forward again. We come into this reality system not understanding our connection. We come in, where I kind of call it wiped. We don't remember that we are spiritual beings having this human experience, and it's intentional because that's how this reality system is set up. Then why is that the goal to finally figure it out? It's almost it's a setup from the beginning and a bit of a frustration. And I'm wondering why that was established, particularly if we have a lot of off-planet energies
Yeah.
and a lot of people off planet working with us right now.
Yes.
In my mind, working almost harder for humanity than humanity is working to awaken ourselves, simply because most people don't know there's an awakening to be
Right.
had,
Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you see
Hmm.
this reality system changing that process? And we come in more aware and awakened and then move forward in our lives?
Yeah. Well, what I know now and what I'm witnessing, and it's just an awe moment where now, as I'm engaging with more people, when I kept it so quiet, and because I almost lost everything. My friends came back, and my ex-husband's, said, wow, I was really off base there. My kids are now in their 40s. They're no longer teenagers. And they said, wow, we thought you were the crazy one. And it turns out you were the only sane one, and
Oh,
out of all of us. So all of that has resolved in that way. But the way that I see the world, I'm going to just call it the Book of Nancy. And it's only because I've worked with about 30,000 different people. I've heard their stories, and Spirit tells me, these are the contracts. So I'll just talk about Earth School. We're just going to say it's like the elite school of learning. It
yeah.
is, let's just say it's the top of the line boarding school in the world where you've made it through all these different levels, and now you get to come here. Now you have been selected as being one that's ready. And you're ready because this is where you get to learn how to manage those beautiful, incredible, powerful emotions that infuse the body. And I love it. There was an article once where the Dalai Lama said they were talking about all of the yogis and how they can do all these great feats, and he said, well, that's wonderful, but it's important to see how they're going to do in the midst of their own powerful emotions. And isn't that true? We can keep a distance when we're working with other people, but when our own life is falling apart, that's where the true test comes in. Can you manage your anger? Can you manage your sadness? And right now, we're struggling with anxiety
Yeah.
and worry and all kinds of things. But there's a strength that's building. So in the early years, usually around the age of 9 to 11, is where that extra energetic auric bubble comes around us. So we all know kids have heightened ability. And sometimes parents will think that their child has this heightened ability, so they were born psychic, but actually all children have these higher levels of connection with spirit. And then once that extra bubble comes over, it's like you're really kind of, the blinders are on because you really want to go through the hard knocks of being in the physical world.
Mhm.
And around the age of 30 is about the time, late 20s, early 30s, is when your spirit starts knocking on the door again and said, all right, now now that you've learned to manage some things here, let's bring in a higher level of spirit, which then accelerates your growth. So you've already learned how to ride that bike. You've learned how to go down the hill without your hands off the handlebars. So now it's spirit's like, all right, let's see if we can get you to go faster without the bicycle wobbling. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, I remember once there was a young man who had been at ashrams and really spiritually developing for a long time. But by the time he hit teenage years, he really struggled. And it was because he said, I don't even know how to think like a teenager. If I go to date someone, all I can think about is what past lives I've had with them, not these raging hormones that are going through my body. And so that really opened my eyes when I realized, oh, we shouldn't be pushing kids to develop. We should
Mhm.
be pushing them to have their life experiences, because when their spirit comes in, they need to be ready.
Yeah. Boy, that's such a good point because if we do get too far out in the weeds, we're not having the human experience that we came here for.
Yes, yes.
Mhm.
But then, I teach a technique. There's one of my methods that I teach. It's like, who's driving your car?
Yeah.
And it's like, is your physical human mind making all the decisions, has their hands on the wheel, or does your spirit and your mind's in the back seat? So once that happens, you still can, but your spirit begins to express through your emotions, and you begin to love being in a body. And I always say, you have arrived in that enlightened state when you no longer wish you weren't here, when you no longer wish you were enlightened, when you stop caring that you can just enjoy the minute to minute daily life of washing dishes and mowing the grass. And that's when you've arrived. And that's tough for people.
Yeah, it is. And right now it's particularly tough.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about how you see what's going on the planet right now. It's a very turbulent time. I'm older, you're a little older as well. We've seen a lot of life. I've never seen life on the planet be quite like this. I
Yep.
mean, it's just the volume is way up. Can you talk about how you perceive it? And then let's move into how do we manage it? Like, how do we get through this in a way that nurtures us and helps to grow us instead of we just completely, the wheels come off and we fall apart?
Yeah, yeah. So it was in 2007. I was guided to write a book. And as the guidance was coming through, I was writing it out, in a journal. And we get to they get to the part with me where they're saying that the world will soon be rapidly awakening, and humanity is going to rapidly awaken. And in that rapid awakening, individuals will be intuitively and psychically opening to their abilities, and they're going to feel like they're being turned upside down, because it's going to scare them, or they're going to feel disoriented, or they're not going to. It's another level of learning how to manage data, how to manage information that's coming in, and coming in rapidly. And then they gave me an example that, okay, Nancy, so at that time, I don't know, maybe, I'd been at this, we'll say 10 years. And they said, now suddenly you're going to meet somebody who has a lot more ability than you do, and they've never meditated, and they can see the spirit world. They can do this, they can do that. And you're going to think in your mind, how can they just have all this ability when they didn't work for it? Right? Because we've had to work, we've had to navigate some pretty dense energies, getting us to this point. And so what Spirit said at the time is that the people awakening are not going to be the problem, but it's going to be those who have the ego who think
Okay.
they shouldn't be able to awaken because they haven't gone through sitting in a cave for 10 years meditating. So I called a friend, and they also gave me the example of this friend. He had been meditating about 25 years at that point, and he had a friend that was very negative, uh, hated it when people meditated. He'd start getting really loud around. So anyway, and then Spirit gave me the example that you've been meditating for 25 years, but now all of a sudden he's going to wake up one day and he's going to say, wow, I really see now that spiritually I was out of line. And so my friend said, that is just not possible. And that kind of niggled at me. And that's the other thing with intuition. You really have to follow your own star. You can't let other people derail you. But I did. And I closed down the book and I didn't finish writing it. And guess what? Now here we are. We have a mass awakening on the earth. We have people with incredible abilities. When I say I am in awe of humanity, that means that they're talking and I feel like I'm sitting at the feet of the masters. And yet they haven't even taken a class to help learn how to manage it. So this is what's happening. But when I say where did it start, Kimberly? I wasn't taught to be afraid of intuition. My parents are really open-minded, but I was terrified. And I've just recently been trying to go back to see where did that begin. And we know being burned at the stake, and we know there's just lots of programming that says we shouldn't open that
Yeah.
door.
And there's still a lot of that on the planet now. I
Yes,
mean,
there is.
I get comments saying this is the devil's work.
Yes, yes,
And
yes.
which is, it just is, that's just a comment. It doesn't mean anything. But one thing I want to say for younger, someone younger watching us right now is the difference in the energy on the planet today compared to 40, 50 years ago is tangible. I
Yes,
mean, it was like slugging through mud
yes,
way back then. And
yeah.
to be able to have a connection to hear, you had to work at it. I mean, it was just a long slug.
Oh, yeah.
And now people, are swigging a beer and saying, oh, yeah, I just heard this. This is,
Exactly. Exactly. That's such a great point.
yeah,
And that's, I'm 65. So I'm like, give us a break.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
you know how hard it was to keep that path trimmed and keep the grasses cut back and keep the sun shining on it until you all were ready to walk it? It's like, give us a break. We worked hard.
Yeah, it was a slug back then. And now I see people channeling very
Yes.
clearly. They're not trance channeling. They're lucid. They'll pop in with
Yeah.
their thoughts and then channel spirit. It's fascinating the
Yeah.
difference in the frequencies that we have on the planet right now.
Yeah.
But I can imagine, and you brought this up a few minutes ago, it can probably be a little disoriented and a little frightening for someone who this is not something that they've ever looked into or been interested in. And all of a sudden they're hearing things or getting a really strong push for their direction in their life. And all of a sudden they're like, what's going on? Am I in charge? Or, what's
Right.
happening in my life?
Yes, and this is the thing about psychic intuitive ability. You don't have to do psychic readings like I do. You don't have to work with the energy field or teach meditation or intuitive development. You just because you can have a conversation with Archangel Michael while you're, eating your breakfast does not mean that you need to go out into the world and leave all the worldly goods behind. But it's about using intuition in your day-to-day life. Like I think about Steve Jobs, I think about all the great ones, the great scientists and things like that. It isn't like they had an extra few brain cells. They had that connection, that higher source, higher wise connection to their soul that was able to bring in more information. And I remember my father was reading this book about the great minds. What did they have in common? And he went chapter by chapter, and the guy that was doing the research found that they had only one thing in common, and that one thing was forced isolation. So whether
Oh.
they had been in bed for months because of an illness, or they had been put in prison because their science was considered off kilter, they had long periods of time by themselves so their spirit could come through and provide them with information. And so how often in this day and age do we provide ourselves with some alone time and some quiet time without our cell phones and without our televisions? Although when I talk to spirit's not saying that we need to do any of that, but to be my spirit's always telling me when I work with students and people, it's like, Nancy, all we need you to do is get them to just sit and close their eyes, and then their spirit will teach them.
Mhm.
And so that's what people, that can be so beneficial for people if they can just close their eyes, even for 5 minutes, and just sense what might come through for them. So it was hard then. It's much quicker now. It is challenging for a lot of people because of the triggering panic and anxieties that are happening. Is those higher frequencies are knocking on your door, and then it's like, I can't function, I can't go out of the house, I need to take a medicine. I'm overly sensitive, empathic. People make their world so small, and all it is their soul is trying to get their attention. And once you say, yes, are you trying to talk to me? The anxiety disappears.
Mhm.
So that's, as a nurse, that's part of my path, is to help people to start looking at that perspective a little differently.
How do you work with people to get them to understand they're not making it up?
Well, that's definitely a them job, but my teaching is, I am an experiential teacher. So what that means is, if you were in my classroom, Kimberly, you I would not stand there like a talking head for a couple of hours while you make your academic notes. The way that I teach is, I'll give a little bit of information, enough to feed the mind and help the mind calm down. It's like, okay, she's given me enough information about how to ground. Now let's put it into practice. And then I have you close your eyes, and then I guide you through grounding so that you can experience that, how that feels in your body. So if I were to just talk to you, you're going to retain about, spiritually and at the human level, you understand about 20% of what I say, even if you're in a week-long workshop with me. But if I have you have your own experience, you retain 80% of it. And so really that's what I do. It's like when someone's like, how do I know this is real? Well, first of all, we don't even know what's real anymore. It's changing
I
so
know.
rapidly. But we need to take our bodies with us. So you want your body to feel, oh, when I ground, I feel a little calmer. When I ground, I'm not so anxious. When I ground, my mind calms down. When I ground, I seem to settle, and you have that experience. So now you go out in the world, and maybe you haven't grounded in a month, but that memory's always there. Oh, wait a minute. The last time I felt like this, if I just sit down and pretend I'm a tree with deep, deep roots, then maybe I can duplicate that feeling. And so, yeah, so then we just start there with grounding, and then we go all the way to traveling in your astral body to other dimensions. But we really, when I teach people, it's about just applying it to day-to-day life. Stressors at work, stressors at home, how do you manage those powerful emotions? How do you manage those anxieties and those depressions? How do you manage people being abusive, to you? How do you manage all that? And then once they get to manage that well, then it's like, okay, we can pick up the speed.
One of the challenges on Earth, and there's lots of them, because this is a tough school. This is, and we all chose to be here, including everyone
Yeah.
watching.
Yeah.
So it's almost set up on the planet, Nancy, that everything we learn the first 12, 16 years of our life is in contradiction to our true nature. We're taught as young children, oh, your imaginary friends are imaginary. Oh, that's a good little story that you made up. I'm sure it didn't happen. We're continually talked out of and sometimes shamed out of our intuitive abilities
Mhm.
starting very young. And then
Mhm.
we get put into a classroom where we sit in these
Yeah,
desks and we look
yeah.
forward. And I mean, it's just one thing after another that is a system built to keep us from really that innate intuitive ability that we have. Everybody has it. Do you see that changing on the planet? What do you hear from Spirit as far as where is humanity going? And are we going to start stepping into the reality of our innate spiritual gifts from the get-go and then expand from there? Because right now I feel like the systems in place where they are challenging, and a challenge can make a human stronger. I don't know that it's serving us in the long run now as far as the potential for the collective.
Well, what I will say is it's already changing.
Yeah.
So, those of us in our age group, we have to remember, how hard it was, but it is changing. It is getting better. What Spirit tells me is it's we've made expansive, awakening, enthusiastic, spiritual growth in ways that is much larger than we realize. That when we're in our world, we feel like, we're doomed. We're not going to make it. The world is going to end. And I do. People write me and say, this is the information I'm getting, and it goes against what you're getting. And I want to be really clear. It's important we all have our information. And I can't guarantee anything that's going to happen, but what I'm being guided is it is improving. The light frequencies are improving. But what's happening as more of the light that shines that light in the basement where the bulb has been broken for a long time, and you've thrown a bunch of paint cans and boxes of Christmas lights down there, and now you've got the bulb in there, and you go down, it's like, whoa, I got a lot of stuff here to deal with. And once you start cleaning that up and getting it organized, but at the time, it feels as if we've made no progress. So I do see that it's improving. I do believe that the collective now, we have to do it together. We have to support each other. It's really important that people find like-minded people. And my thing is, and not make it so darn hard for people to find you. It's like for me, that's why it felt like it was so hard for me to find help, because I told my story in a nutshell, but it was so hard for me to find help and not think that I was crazy that I never kept quiet about what I did. I never kept quiet about what I was seeing because I wanted people to be able to find me if they need
Mhm.
help, putting signs up, getting business cards, you know. So that's what's happening right now. There's a lot of really incredible people. I just went down to Arkansas, and I'm live in Washington State. I was born in Arkansas, and the ancestral land there and the ancestral influence there and the deep kindness and the deep caring, it was just so palpable. So even if I felt like maybe I needed to be a little bit more conservative about my abilities and what I did, I'll just say I'm a meditation teacher and leave it at that. It doesn't mean if they're more conservative, it still doesn't mean they're not contributing light to the world.
Mhm.
And so that's what Spirit's always saying. It's like at that higher dimensional level, everyone is assisting, everyone, even criminals. So they're always clear to say. But at the human level, yeah, they're following a different script. So I have a lot of hope. And what I know is people want to feel better.
Mhm.
They want to feel better. They may not meditate, but I also know just like me in an instant, suddenly sighted, that can happen to anyone. One day they can just be the most crabby, difficult person to deal with. And then the next day, it's like, what just happened to you? You know? And skeptics, they're like some of the most incredible psychics on the planet.
Why do you think that is? What's the combination of traits that makes that true?
Well, because I've had skeptics come in because their wives or their husbands want their partner to be on board with whatever they're believing. So the skeptics come in, the arms are crossed and like, how soon can this be over? And I don't believe in any of this stuff. And then I'll say, wow, you have a sister that's really jealous of your success in life. And they'll go, how'd you know I had a sister? And how'd you know that? And it was like, well, it's in your energy field. It's just pulsating. But what happens is it's a lot of fear. So if they had a past life where, yeah, it was not okay, it was dangerous to maybe they died, and so they bring that fear into this lifetime, and it can show up as a layer of skepticism. And then once that layer is kind of cleared, and they have to do it slowly, I can help a little bit, but they keep clearing, and then all of a sudden their gifts can really blast open, and then they're a whole different person. Well, they're not different, they just become all of who they were meant to be.
Yeah. I've also heard that children who are raised in homes that are not emotionally healthy, that there's a lot of abuse or a lot of mismanagement of emotions, that's a recipe for a second child
Yeah,
because they have to then use their
exactly.
skills and their energy field in order to read the room, in
Right.
order to stay safe.
Yeah.
So you've really set up an environment for someone to expand their skill set without even understanding what they're doing.
Correct. And I do say some of the most, traumatized people make the best psychics, but their journey is not easy
Yeah.
because when you have learned to develop a very high level, acute level of psychic skill and ability for survival, then it can take, when I'm working with you, we've got to now shift that you don't have to feel like you're in danger to
Yeah.
be able to access your abilities. And so then how to turn that around, kind of shift the wiring, the wires that are crossed, so you can start enjoying your abilities and using them for positive information. That can take a few years to turn that around, and it's hard work for the students, but it's so beautiful when they can turn that around. And yeah, a lot of my students have their own stories, and when I was in school, I had my own story, and my classmates, it was just like, wow, some of the things they went through, but they were incredible readers, you know.
Yeah. So tell us about the work that you're doing now. I don't think you're doing private sessions now, or do you still do some private sessions?
No, I had about I was still doing some private sessions during COVID,
Mhm.
but my waiting list was about a year long, and
Yeah.
it was, and because I'm a nurse and I can work with crisis and trauma, I'd had to keep open emergency appointments. And so I loved it. But I was being guided for about 3 years that I needed to start working with larger groups. I'd already been working with groups, but to really start working with larger groups, it was a really tough decision for me to walk away from over 20 years of clients that I had. So no, I don't do private readings anymore, but I do group readings. So, and I do that with my students. So I have 3 year long learning, we'll just call it, beginning and middle and then advanced. Psychic Mastery 1, 2, and 3. And so, yeah, I don't ever stop reading. So right now I'm reading situations that are happening on the planet. I'm reading countries, I'm reading stars, I'm reading star beings, so I get my reading time in. But if you are one of my students, and you're in front of me and I'm teaching, that week, I'm going to read your field at times to see what's getting blocked or where you're stuck. So that's where my readings, that's where I get to still read, is with my students.
Yeah, and I imagine that that feels satisfying to you to be able to do that, to use that skill set and to really, immerse yourself in that. It's interesting to me you said reading countries. Tell us about that. I have not heard anybody say those words just like that, although I do know people who will look at different parts of the planet and get a sense. How do you read a country?
Well, a country, all right, so you have an auric field and you have chakras. And if you're in a relationship, then you have a relationship aura and a set of chakras that's separate from you and your partners. You both have your own set of chakras in your aura, but then you have a relationship aura. If you're in a family, if you have kids or grandkids, then that's the family aura. So then, and I've just, spirits taught me this over time. And so then if you, I happen to live in Tacoma, Washington. Tacoma, Washington definitely has its own aura, its own set of chakras, its own purpose, its own personality that's very different than Seattle. Very different. Or different than Little Rock, Arkansas, or Dallas, Texas, or New Orleans, and Louisiana. It's all the cities have different personalities, different states have different personalities, different countries have different personalities, frequencies. Let me just talk about frequencies. So, Canada, you've got the United States. I'm 3 hours from the border. I can literally drive across the border and the whole frequency shifts to a very feminine frequency. We've got a very masculine frequency. It can be really jarring here in the United States. And then you just cross the border. So I really started just noticing, different places. And I think of different countries as like I don't know, it's not a human, but it has its signature.
Yeah,
It has
and I
its own
can see that
fingerprint.
just from you describing it. I can start to feel the energy of the collective within that
Yes.
geographic.
And every country contributes to the collective. They
Mhm.
contribute their frequency to the collective. And it's interesting because I've been doing, it's called the blue light hotspots, because this frequency of blue light that came, that comes from the universe really supercharged these blue crystals in the center of the earth. And then that is supercharging all the countries. But it's interesting because I'm guided which country to read next. But if it's a country that's politically triggering, if I can put it that way,
Mhm.
nobody wants to watch that video. But if it's a
Wow,
country that's
because
not
they can
politically,
feel it.
so if it's a country that's not politically triggering, like Ireland, it gets 35,000 views. And if it's Saudi Arabia, it gets 2,000 views, but what spirit keeps wanting everyone, I want everyone to hear this loud and clear. It is not our political, or our thinking or religious, thoughts that are creating the beautiful frequencies that are over 100 million years old. And that's where they're having me tap in, because it can be a combination of gold or diamonds, like when I did for South Africa. You're going to have these minerals that are contributing to the frequency of consciousness. So we don't really get caught up in, the spirit world does not get caught up in what religion they may believe in. And so recently they want me to start talking about Afghanistan. And I'm like, whoo, that's got a lot of baggage,
Yeah,
you
I
know.
was going to use that word too. A lot of baggage. Mhm.
But when I started to tune in, it's like, holy smokes, this place has some really ancient, beautiful frequencies.
Mhm.
And so then I start thinking like, well, how's it getting messed up like this? Like where did those lines start to get broken? The ley lines, the vortexes, how did they get damaged? That's where my mind starts to go, you know, I mean, you've got England, you've got the United Kingdom, you have Wales, you have Scotland, and they're busy countries, and it's noisy. So I can feel into this like incredible magical mystery tour of frequencies underneath that's still radiating to the surface, but it's so noisy with our 3D experiences right now. So it's fascinating. I'm guided to do it. People are finding it. I call them intuitive archaeologists.
Oh, I love that. I love
So
that.
I ask everybody to contribute to what they're picking up. So I think we are learning a lot about we are part of a bigger world than just what's going on in our life.
Yeah, and I hear humanity makes it too. It's just a little
Good.
bumpy right now.
Yes. Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Oh yeah.
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 Okay. Well, how do we find out more about you?
Well, my website is intuitivemind.org. And so you can find out information about my classes there. And you can place yourself on a waiting list. And I do currently have a free 3-day workshop that's coming up June 5th, 6th, and 7th. So that link will be in the segment here. You could sign up. It's free, and it's called the Answer Accelerator because that's really what people want right now. They want to be able to use their intuition to get answers, and answers on how to raise teenagers, answers on how to deal with a boss that's difficult, or answers of the universe. And so it's called the Answer Accelerator. It's a 3-day workshop. So that link is here. But because intuitive styles are really different. So my intuitive style is more predominantly a seer. I can see energy. But other people, predominant style might be pure knower. You just know, or a feeler, or one that's really rare, but really growing in significance is clairaudience. Telepathy is opening up like crazy, and people are beginning to hear answers, and so I have a link to take the free intuitive style questionnaire to learn what your intuitive style is.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I just got a big shot of energy. It felt really good. Thank you. And
awesome.
I'll have all that information listed in the description box down below. Nancy, this has been fascinating. I hope you'll come back.
Oh, I'd love to come back. I can tell
Okay.
we have a lot to talk about.
We do have a lot to talk about. Thank you. And thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating. And
Oh,
thanks everyone for watching. Bye now.
bye-bye.
I hope you enjoyed this video. Coming up next, this is a good one, or you might really like this one too. Either one of them could be perfect for you. Before you leave, don't forget to subscribe.